A veteran and his dog rescued an old woman. Then another old woman gave them a photo studio. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Imagine one quiet morning, in a sleepy town nestled between rolling hills, a former soldier and his loyal dog are taking a walk down the main street. The air is crisp, and the sound of the leaves rustling in the wind is the only noise that breaks the silence. He's been through a lot, years of service, followed by years of uncertainty. The dog, a German shepherd named Max, has been his companion through it all. They've seen the world together, and now they're just trying to find a place to call home. As they stroll down the street, something catches the soldier's eye, a figure struggling in the yard of an old house at the end of the road. The soldier's heart races, a sense of urgency kicking in. Without thinking, he rushes toward the house. Max barks excitedly as they approach, his tail wagging in anticipation. The soldier calls out, but there's no response. He hurries to the front porch and sees an elderly woman trapped underneath a heavy branch from a fallen tree. Her frail body is pinned, and she's unable to move. Panic rises in her eyes as she struggles to free herself, but it's no use. The soldier takes a deep breath, immediately assessing the situation. Years of training have prepared him for moments like this, and he knows he has to act fast. Without hesitation, he slides underneath the branch, using his strength to lift it just enough for the woman to crawl out. Max stands watch, his ears perked up, ready to spring into action if needed. With one final heave, the soldier frees the woman, helping her to her feet. She's shaken, but alive. Tears fill her eyes as she clutches his arm, whispering her thanks. "You saved my life," she says, her voice trembling. The soldier nods, offering a reassuring smile. "No one should be left alone," he replies. The woman looks at him with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Little does she know, this act of kindness will lead to something she never expected. After helping her inside, the soldier introduces himself. His name is Jack, and this is his loyal companion, Max. The woman, Mrs. Williams, invites them to stay for a warm cup of tea as a small token of appreciation. They sit together by the fireplace, the warmth of the fire offering comfort after the cold air outside. As they chat, Mrs. Williams reveals something Jack didn't expect. She's alone, having lost her family many years ago. The soldier listens intently, realizing there's more to this encounter than just a rescue. It feels as if fate has brought them together. But just as Jack is about to leave, Mrs. Williams drops a bombshell. She turns to him and says, "I have something I'd like to give you." Jack looks at her, puzzled. What could an elderly woman possibly have to offer him? She walks over to a cabinet, opens it, and pulls out a set of keys. "This is for you," she says. "I want you to have it." Jack stares at the keys, confused and unsure of what she means. Mrs. Williams smiles softly. "I've owned a photography studio for years. It's been my life's work. But now, I'm too old to run it anymore. I've been looking for someone worthy to take over, and I believe you are that person." Jack is taken aback, his mind racing. A photography studio? What does he know about running a business like that? But as he looks at Mrs. Williams, he realizes this is more than just a gift. It's a new beginning, a chance to build something of his own. And Max, his faithful dog, will be by his side through it all. As Jack and Max settled into their new life, the weight of Mrs. Williams' gift began to sink in. A photography studio. At first, it seemed like a dream, an unexpected blessing. But the reality was far different. The studio, nestled in a quiet corner of town, hadn't seen much business in recent years. The equipment was old, the walls were lined with dusty portraits, and the once vibrant photographs had faded with time. Yet, there was something about the place that felt alive. Perhaps it was the old camera in the corner, a relic of a time when photography captured more than just images, but emotions. Jack ran his fingers across the worn wood of the counter, taking in the faint smell of old film and paper. He had never been a photographer, but he understood people. He had always known how to connect with others during his time in the service. This studio could be his second chance. But first, he had to figure out how to run it. Max padded beside him, his fur still damp from the morning walk. The dog's steady presence reminded Jack that, no matter how daunting this new chapter seemed, he was not alone. Over the next few days, Jack cleaned the studio, moving old furniture and scrubbing away years of neglect. He found a few photos tucked away in a drawer, pictures of families, children smiling, couples in love. Each photo told a story, a moment captured in time, and Jack could feel the power of those memories. They weren't just images, they were pieces of someone's life, preserved forever. As Jack worked, he found himself growing more attached to the place. He began to feel as if the studio had a soul of its own, and that soul needed to be revived. But how? One evening, as he sat at the counter, sipping coffee and pondering his next steps, the bell above the door chimed softly. A woman walked in, looking somewhat hesitant but curious. Her clothes were plain, and she carried an air of quiet dignity. Jack stood up, offering her a warm smile. "Can I help you?" he asked. The woman hesitated for a moment before answering. "I heard this place was open again," she said. "I'm Clara. I used to come here with my family years ago." Jack nodded, recognizing the name. He had seen Clara's face in some of the old photographs, though he hadn't expected her to walk through the door. "It's good to see you," Jack said. "It's been a long time since anyone's come in." Clara's eyes flickered with a mixture of sadness and nostalgia. "This place used to mean so much to people," she said softly. "My parents came here for all our family portraits. But after they passed, the studio was left to fade away. I've always hoped someone would bring it back to life." Jack could feel the weight of her words. It wasn't just a business. It was a part of the town's history, a place where memories had been made. And now, it was in his hands. "I'm trying," Jack said, his voice filled with determination. "I'm not sure how to make it work, but I'll try." Clara smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "That's all anyone can do," she said. "I'm sure it'll come back. You've got the right heart for it." Over the next few weeks, Jack began to put his plan into motion. He started small, offering discounted family portrait sessions to anyone who would listen. The first few customers trickled in, many of them longtime residents of the town who remembered the studio's heyday. Slowly but surely, word began to spread. As the days went on, Jack learned more about the art of photography. He discovered the joy of capturing moments, of freezing time for people who wanted to preserve their memories. But it wasn't just about taking pictures. It was about connecting with his clients, making them feel comfortable in front of the camera. He found that he had a natural gift for it. People opened up to him, sharing stories of their lives, their triumphs, their losses. And Max, always by his side, became the unofficial mascot of the studio. He greeted each new client with a wag of his tail and a friendly bark, making the studio feel more like a home than a business. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the studio, Jack sat back in his chair and looked around. The walls, once dull and lifeless, were now filled with framed portraits, families, couples, children, and even a few lonely souls who had found solace in the studio. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was a place where people came to share their stories, to capture the essence of their lives. And Jack felt something stirring within him. This was his calling. This was the purpose he had been searching for. As he closed up for the night, Clara walked in again, a smile on her face. "I told you it would come back to life," she said, her voice full of pride. Jack stood up and nodded. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. Clara's smile widened. "You've done more than bring the studio back. You've brought the town together. And for that, we're all grateful." Jack looked around at the photos on the walls, at the faces that had come to trust him. It wasn't just about the business. It was about making memories, about giving people a place where they could feel valued. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt truly at home. As the weeks turned into months, the studio continued to grow, and so did Jack's understanding of the business and his place in the town. With Max always by his side, the two had become local legends. Jack, the quiet veteran with a heart full of hope, and Max, the ever-loyal German shepherd, were a constant presence in the studio. People began to pour in, not just for family portraits, but for engagement photos, senior pictures, and even business headshots. Jack's reputation spread like wildfire, and the studio became the heartbeat of the town. But as business boomed, Jack realized something he hadn't expected. A deep, unspoken loneliness began to creep in. He had spent years serving others, But now, as he stood behind the camera capturing the lives of others, he realized he had never truly shared his own story. There was a part of him, buried deep, that still ached from the years of service, the memories that still haunted him, and the family he had lost. One evening, after a long day of shooting, Jack sat alone in the studio, the lights dimmed low. Max lay at his feet, resting after the busy day. Jack gazed at the photographs lining the walls, each one a frozen moment in time, capturing the essence of a family's love or a couple's joy. But Jack's own photo was nowhere to be seen. There was no picture of his life, his journey, the struggles he had overcome. It felt as if he had become a part of everyone else's story, yet his own remained untold. The thought lingered, heavy in the air. What was he hiding from? What was he so afraid to confront? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He glanced up, surprised. It was late, and the town was quiet. He opened the door to find Clara standing there, her face etched with concern. "Jack, are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle yet full of care. Jack smiled softly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he replied. "Just tired." Clara stepped inside, looking around at the quiet, empty studio. "I know you're busy, but I wanted to talk," she said, her eyes meeting his. Jack could see the sincerity in her gaze. Clara had always been there for him, offering support when he needed it most. She had seen the transformation in him from the moment he first walked into the studio. He owed her a lot. "What's on your mind?" Jack asked, his voice softening. Clara hesitated for a moment, then sat down across from him. "I've been thinking about you, Jack," she began. "I know you've been doing so much for others, giving them a space to preserve their memories, but I don't think you've taken the time to preserve your own." Jack frowned slightly, unsure of where this conversation was going. "What do you mean?" Clara's eyes were kind but firm. "You've been so focused on building this studio, on giving everyone else a piece of their story, that you've forgotten about your own," she said. "You have a story to tell, Jack. You've lived through so much. You can't keep it all locked away forever." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't realized how much he had kept buried. The thought of opening up, of sharing his pain, was terrifying. But Clara was right. He had to face his past in order to truly move forward. "I don't know if I'm ready to share it," Jack admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Clara smiled, her face warm with understanding. "You don't have to do it all at once," she said. "But don't let the past control you. You've built something beautiful here, Jack. Don't let your own story be left behind." Jack sat in silence, taking in her words. He had built this studio with his hands, but he had neglected to build his own emotional foundation. The photographs in the studio represented memories, both happy and sad, but they were all someone else's. It was time for Jack to step into his own light, to stop hiding behind the lens. Over the next few days, Jack began to take small steps toward opening up. He started with the simplest thing. He hung up a photograph of himself and Max, taken during one of their walks in the woods. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Slowly, he began to confront his past, not all at once, but in pieces. He spoke to Clara more often, and sometimes, even to the clients who came into the studio. Sharing his story wasn't easy, but it felt freeing, like he was shedding an old skin. One afternoon, a regular customer, Mrs. Green, came in with her granddaughter for a portrait. She noticed the photo of Jack and Max on the wall and smiled. "That's a great photo, Jack," she said. "I'm glad you've got one up there." Jack smiled back, his heart swelling with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. "Thanks, Mrs. Green," he said. "It's good to have a reminder of where I've been." As the weeks passed, Jack began to see the difference in himself. The studio was thriving, and so was he. He no longer felt like a spectator in his own life, watching everyone else's stories unfold while his own remained locked away. Jack had learned that to give others a place to preserve their memories, he first had to make room for his own. As time passed, the photo studio became more than just a business. It became a cornerstone of the town's community. Jack, with Max by his side, had transformed a forgotten space into a thriving hub of memories. The walls were now lined with vibrant photographs that told the stories of families, couples, and individuals who had come seeking to capture their most cherished moments. But even as the studio flourished, Jack found himself grappling with the overwhelming pressure to keep it all together. While he had learned to open up to others, to share his own story through the lens of his camera, there was still a lingering fear inside him, a fear of failure. The thought that he could lose everything he had worked so hard for haunted him at night. One afternoon, as Jack was preparing for an upcoming wedding shoot, his phone rang. It was Clara. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her voice calm but serious. He set the camera down, his heart skipping a beat. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Clara paused for a moment before speaking. "I've been hearing rumors," she said. "There's talk of a new studio opening in town. They're offering the same services as you, but with lower prices." Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Competition was inevitable, but the thought of someone else taking away his customers, his community, was crushing. "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara's response was steady, filled with the same wisdom that had guided Jack from the beginning. "You don't need to worry about them, Jack. Focus on what you're doing. You've built something special here, something real. People come to you because they trust you." Jack thought about her words as the days went by. He had poured his heart into this studio, and the community had responded in kind. The families he had worked with, the individuals who had shared their stories, they didn't just come for the photographs. They came because they knew Jack cared about them, about capturing the essence of their lives. And that was something a lower price tag couldn't replace. But even with Clara's encouraging words, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of something unpredictable. Then, one rainy afternoon, as Jack was locking up for the day, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Mrs. Williams, the elderly woman who had given him the studio in the first place. She smiled warmly as she stepped inside. "I see you've been doing well," she said, her voice full of pride. Jack returned the smile, but there was a hint of worry in his eyes. "I'm trying," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his thoughts. Mrs. Williams tilted her head, studying him carefully. "You're afraid, aren't you?" she asked, her eyes kind yet knowing. Jack nodded. He hadn't realized how much fear had taken root in his heart until Mrs. Williams put it into words. He was afraid of losing everything. The studio, the community, the sense of purpose he had found. "I'm afraid I won't be enough," he admitted. "That I'll lose it all." Mrs. Williams placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Jack, the studio is not just about the photos. It's about what you give to people. You've already done so much for this town. Don't let fear take that away from you." Her words hit home harder than anything else could have. Jack had been so focused on the idea of keeping the business afloat, of proving himself, that he had forgotten the true purpose of the studio. It wasn't just about the pictures, it was about the connections he had made, the memories he had helped preserve. Jack stood there for a moment, taking in Mrs. Williams' words. He realized that what he had built was not something that could be taken away so easily. It was more than a business. It was a legacy, a place where people could come to capture the most important moments of their lives. And as long as he continued to focus on that, nothing else mattered. The next day, Jack walked into the studio with a renewed sense of confidence. He looked at the photos on the wall, his own photo now included among them, and smiled. Max trotted over to him, his tail wagging. Jack knelt down to give him a pat. "We've got this, boy," he said softly. And in that moment, Jack knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had already built something lasting. The studio would continue to thrive, not because of the prices it offered, but because of the heart behind it. And as long as he stayed true to that, he would never lose what truly mattered. As the days turned into weeks, Jack's photo studio continued to grow and evolve, but so did the town's sense of connection. People from all walks of life, young and old, came through the door. Jack and Max had created more than just a business. They had created a space where people could come and feel seen, valued, and heard. But despite this growth, a nagging doubt still lingered in the back of Jack's mind. Was he truly doing enough? Was the studio enough to support the dreams he had once set aside? He often found himself staring at the old camera on the counter, wondering if he was living the life he had always hoped for, or just getting by. One afternoon, as Jack was finishing up a session with a young couple, Clara stopped by the studio. Her warm smile was a welcome sight, as it always was. Jack greeted her with a tired smile. "How's everything going?" she asked, her voice filled with the same concern that had always guided her. Jack shrugged, the weight of his thoughts making him feel heavy. "It's good, I guess. But sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough. There's always more to do, more to improve. I can't help but feel like I'm falling short." Clara walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Jack, look around," she said. "You've done more than enough. The studio isn't just a place for pictures. It's where people come to feel heard, to find meaning, to remember what matters most. Jack's gaze wandered around the studio, the walls lined with the faces of families, couples, and individuals. Each portrait was a reminder of the lives he had touched. Clara was right. The studio had become a sanctuary for many, a place where people could connect with their memories in ways they had never thought possible. But still, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had helped others find their stories, but he hadn't fully embraced his own. The thought weighed on him. "I know what you're saying, Clara," Jack said softly, "but I still feel like I need to do more, like I'm not living up to my potential." Clara looked at him with understanding. "Jack, you've already done more than most people ever will. You're building something real, something that will last. And maybe it's not about doing more. Maybe it's about accepting where you are and being at peace with that." Jack thought about her words as she left, the soft sound of the door closing behind her. He sat in the quiet studio for a while, letting her words settle in. He had built this life with his own hands, and it was more than enough. The studio was thriving, and people were finding value in what he did. But what about his own story? He knew that in order to truly feel whole, he had to stop running from his past and start embracing it. The next day, Jack took a step he had been avoiding for a long time. He went through the old boxes in the back of the studio, the ones he had ignored for months. Inside, he found old letters, mementos from his time in the service, and photographs of his family. Memories he had tucked away, afraid to confront the pain they held. As he went through them, something began to change within him. He realized that these memories didn't have to define him in a negative way. They were a part of him, but they didn't have to control him. He could carry them with him, but he didn't have to be burdened by them. That evening, Jack decided to take another step forward. He called up some old friends from his time in the service, people he hadn't spoken to in years. They talked for hours, sharing stories of the past, the challenges they had faced, and the victories they had earned. It felt good to reconnect with them, to remind himself of who he was before all of this. The man who had fought for others, the man who had overcome so much. That night, as Jack lay in bed, he realized that he had been living in the shadows of his past, trying to outrun it. But now, he saw that he didn't have to hide from it anymore. He could stand tall, knowing that he had come through everything stronger and more determined than ever. The next morning, Jack walked into the studio with a renewed sense of purpose. He felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, least of all himself. The studio had become a part of his legacy, a place where he had helped people capture their most precious moments. But now, Jack was ready to capture his own story. He started by taking a self-portrait, something he had never done before. It wasn't just about the picture. It was about acknowledging who he had become and what he had accomplished. Max trotted over to him, and Jack smiled, kneeling down to give him a scratch behind the ears. "We've come a long way, haven't we, boy?" he said softly. And in that moment, Jack knew that no matter what the future held, he was ready to face it, not with fear, but with the strength that had always been inside him. As the months passed, the studio continued to grow, and so did Jack's understanding of himself. He had come a long way from the quiet, uncertain man he had been when he first stepped into this town. With Max at his side and the photo studio thriving, Jack had started to believe that perhaps he had found his place in the world. Yet, even as the business blossomed, there was still a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. He had been so focused on rebuilding the studio and his life that he had neglected to consider the future beyond the walls of the studio. What would happen once the town's memory of him as a hero started to fade? Could he continue to build his life on the foundation he had created, or would it all crumble? One afternoon, as Jack sat behind the counter, reflecting on these thoughts, there was a soft knock on the door. He looked up to see an unfamiliar face, a man in his early 60s, dressed in a weathered jacket and worn jeans. The man stepped inside with a kind, though tired, smile. "Good afternoon," he said. "I heard this was the place to capture some memories." Jack smiled and stood up to greet him. "That's right. What kind of session are you looking for?" The man hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice quiet, but filled with a weight of experience. "I've never had my portrait taken," he said, "but I'm not getting any younger. I thought it was time." Jack led the man to the back of the studio, where he had set up his usual backdrop. As he prepared the camera, the man's story began to unfold. His name was Henry, and he had spent most of his life working on a small farm just outside of town. He had never been one to seek attention or make a fuss, but as the years had gone by, he realized that the memories of his life, his struggles, his joys, and his family, were slipping away like sand through his fingers. "My wife passed a few years back," Henry explained, his voice tinged with sadness. "We never had much, but we had each other. And now, there's just me. I've got kids scattered across the country, and they all tell me to slow down, but I can't help feeling like there's something missing. Something I should have done." Jack listened carefully, feeling a deep connection to Henry. He understood the feeling of having a life full of effort, but not always knowing if it had been enough. "I know how you feel," Jack said, setting up the camera and focusing on Henry's face. "But what matters most is that you're still here. You still have time to make new memories, to leave behind something meaningful." Henry smiled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I guess so," he said. "I just want something to leave behind, something for the kids to remember me by." Jack could see the weight Henry carried with him, the years of labor and love etched into his weathered face. As he clicked the shutter, capturing the moment, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was what he had been missing, a deeper connection to the people he served. It wasn't just about the photographs. It was about the stories, the lives that had shaped these memories. As Henry left the studio later that day, Jack realized that this moment, this simple portrait, was the kind of legacy he had been searching for. It wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about the small moments, the quiet connections that built a life worth remembering. In the days that followed, Jack began to reflect more on what truly mattered to him. He thought about his time in the service, about the people he had met, and the sacrifices that had shaped him. But he also realized that he had been given a chance to live a different life now, a life where he could make a real difference. The studio had become more than just a place to take pictures. It was a place where people could share their stories, relive their memories, and leave behind something for future generations. It was a place where Jack could not only help others, but also help himself, to finally embrace the life he had built. Max, ever loyal, had been by his side through it all. The dog had become a symbol of the resilience Jack had found within himself. Every morning, as Jack walked to the studio, he felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. He had been given a second chance, one that he would not waste. As the town continued to grow, so did Jack's place within it. He had become a fixture, not just as the man behind the camera, but as someone who had witnessed and preserved the stories of others. And through those stories, he had found his own. Jack knew that his journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but he was ready. He had learned that life wasn't about perfection. It was about making the most of every moment, every opportunity, and embracing the beauty in the imperfection. As Jack looked around the studio one evening, the soft glow of the fading sun casting shadows across the photographs on the wall, he realized something profound. The legacy he had been searching for wasn't something he had to create. It was something he had been living all along. As Jack looked at the growing collection of portraits and memories displayed on the walls of his studio, something inside him began to shift. The quiet sense of accomplishment he had felt in the beginning had turned into something deeper, more fulfilling. The studio had truly become a sanctuary for the people of the town, but it had also become a personal journey for him. He had found peace in sharing his story, but more than that, he had learned to embrace the power of his own legacy. He was no longer just the soldier with a past he wanted to forget. He was a man who had rebuilt his life and was now helping others do the same. One afternoon, as Jack was sorting through some files, he received a phone call. It was from Clara, and her voice, usually calm and collected, had a hint of urgency in it. "Jack, there's something I need to tell you," she said. "I heard from Mrs. Williams that there's an opportunity for the studio to expand. They want to open a second location in the neighboring town." Jack felt his heart race. He had never even considered expanding beyond the small town he had come to love. "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked, his voice uncertain. "It's a big step." Clara paused for a moment before responding. "I know it's a lot to think about, but this could be the chance for you to reach more people, to bring your vision to a wider audience. You've created something special here, Jack. It's time to think about the future." Jack sat back in his chair, the weight of Clara's words sinking in. He had always kept things small, safe, but now it felt like the universe was pushing him to step outside of his comfort zone. For the first time, He allowed himself to imagine what life could be like if he took the leap. His mind raced with possibilities, but at the same time, a knot of fear tightened in his chest. What if he couldn't handle it? What if it was too much? But then he thought about the people he had helped, the memories he had captured, and the families who had trusted him to preserve their legacies. He had built this from the ground up. Why couldn't he do it again? That night, as Jack walked home with Max, he thought about everything that had brought him to this point. The late nights, the struggles, the quiet moments of doubt, but also the smiles, the laughter, and the warmth of the community he had built. The town had become his family, and they had welcomed him with open arms. Max, ever the loyal companion, trotted beside him, his steady presence a reminder that Jack was never truly alone. As they reached Jack's house, the sound of the crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze filled the air, creating a sense of peace. Jack stood at the front door and turned to look at the town, the familiar streets, and the warm lights shining from the studio. He knew that this place was where he belonged. It had given him more than he had ever imagined. But now, as he looked at the future, he felt something stirring within him, a new sense of purpose. The next morning, Jack met with Clara to discuss the opportunity in more detail. She had already done some research on the neighboring town, and she believed it had the potential to bring in new clients while still honoring the integrity of what Jack had built. "It's a chance to spread your message, Jack," she said. "To help more people, to reach more hearts. This could be the next step for you." Jack took a deep breath and nodded. Clara was right. He had started this journey with nothing but a desire to make a difference, and now he had the chance to do so on a larger scale. He couldn't let fear hold him back. "Let's do it," Jack said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's open that second location." Over the next few months, Jack worked tirelessly to prepare for the new location. He spent long hours refining his vision, making sure that the studio would maintain the same warmth and intimacy that had made the first one so special. It wasn't just about expanding the business. It was about spreading the same message he had built his life on: the importance of connection, of memories, and of telling our stories. Max continued to be by his side, the dog now a symbol of loyalty and strength that Jack relied on more than ever. As the grand opening of the second location approached, Jack felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The town had embraced him, but would the new town do the same? Would he be able to replicate the success of the original studio, or would he fail? It was a risk, but Jack knew that sometimes the biggest risks brought the greatest rewards. On opening day, Jack stood outside the new studio, looking at the bustling streets and the bright signs welcoming visitors. Max stood next to him, tail wagging in anticipation. As the doors opened, people began to trickle in, and the familiar feeling of connection washed over Jack once again. This was the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that held endless possibilities. He had faced his fears, embraced his past, and built something beautiful. And now, he was ready to share it with the world. With Max by his side, Jack stepped into the new chapter of his journey, knowing that whatever came next, he had already built a legacy that would last a lifetime. As the new studio in the neighboring town began to settle in, Jack found himself balancing both locations. The initial excitement of expansion was starting to feel like a heavy weight, and there were days when he wondered if he had stretched himself too thin. Yet, every time he stepped into the studio, no matter the location, he was reminded of why he had taken the leap in the first place. The smiles on his clients' faces, the laughter that echoed through the walls, and the stories they shared, it was all worth it. However, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had built a successful business, created a second studio, and was helping people preserve their memories. But in his pursuit of growth, he had neglected something: his own life outside of the studio. One late evening, as Jack sat alone in the office, Max curled up on the floor at his feet, he found himself staring at the walls lined with portraits. Each one told a unique story, but for some reason, his own story still felt incomplete. Jack thought back to the early days when he had first taken the leap to open the studio. He had been so focused on the future, so driven by the idea of success, that he had pushed aside his personal life, his own desires, and his own needs. He had lived a life serving others. But when was the last time he had truly done something just for himself? That night, Jack made a decision. He realized that while he had spent so much time helping others create memories, he had not been taking the time to create his own. It wasn't about building an empire or expanding the business. It was about finding balance, about taking a moment to breathe, and about reconnecting with the parts of his life that he had neglected. The next day, Jack made a call to Clara. She had been his rock throughout this entire journey, and he knew she would understand. "Clara, I think I need to take some time off," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "I've been so focused on the studios and expanding that I've lost touch with everything else. I need to step back and reassess." Clara was silent for a moment before responding. "Jack, I think that's a wise decision. You've built something incredible, but you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to take care of yourself too. I'll handle things here while you take the time you need." Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders as Clara's words sank in. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to consider the idea of rest, of recharging, and of reconnecting with the world outside of the studio. Over the next few weeks, Jack took a break from the studio. He spent time with friends, visited old places that held memories, and took long walks with Max through the woods. He reconnected with the simple joys of life, the ones that didn't require a camera or a business plan. Jack realized how much he had missed just being present in the moment. One afternoon, while walking through the park, Jack met an older man sitting on a bench. The man looked up, and their eyes met. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," the man said with a knowing smile. "I know that look. Been there myself." Jack chuckled softly. "I've been busy. Too busy, I think." The man nodded. "I used to be too. But one day, I realized I was missing the whole point of life. I was chasing things, money, success, recognition. But none of that matters if you don't stop to enjoy the journey." Jack sat down beside the man, and they began talking. The conversation meandered from small talk to deep thoughts about life, purpose, and what truly mattered. The man shared stories of his own life, of moments he had missed because he was too focused on the wrong things. Jack listened, realizing that this simple moment, sitting with a stranger and exchanging wisdom, was one of the most meaningful interactions he had experienced in a long time. That night, Jack went home feeling lighter. He had spent weeks chasing after success, expanding his business, and building a name for himself. But now, he understood. The real success wasn't in the accolades or the money. It was in the people, the relationships, and the moments that made life meaningful. As Jack continued to spend time reflecting, he realized that he had built something truly remarkable, but he had also neglected the need for balance and self-care. It was time for him to embrace both sides of his life, the businessman and the person. He knew that he couldn't help others if he wasn't taking care of himself first. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jack returned to the studio, but this time with a new perspective. He didn't need to constantly strive for more. He needed to enjoy what he had already created. The studio was thriving, and the community was stronger than ever. Jack had learned the value of stepping back and recharging, and he was ready to take his next steps with a clearer mind and a fuller heart. The journey was far from over, but now, Jack was ready to embrace it with the peace and understanding that he had been searching for all along. As the seasons changed, so did Jack's perspective on life. He had spent years chasing something he thought he wanted, but it wasn't until he took a step back that he realized what truly mattered. The photo studio had become more than just a business. It was a place that connected people, preserved memories, and offered a sense of belonging. But now, with his heart lighter and his mind clearer, Jack felt ready for the next chapter. It was time to build something even more meaningful, not just for himself, but for the community that had supported him every step of the way. One crisp morning, Jack woke up early, the first rays of sunlight creeping through the window. Max, his ever-faithful companion, was already awake, his tail wagging as he watched Jack get out of bed. There was a renewed sense of purpose in Jack's heart. He had spent so long worrying about the future, about whether the studio would continue to succeed, but now he realized it wasn't just about success. It was about building a legacy that would last beyond the walls of the studio. He had a vision. Jack had always believed in the power of connection, and he wanted to create a place where people could come together, not just for photographs, but for support, healing, and community. It wasn't going to be easy. It would take time, energy, and resources. But Jack knew it was what he was meant to do. Over the next few weeks, Jack began to lay the groundwork for his new idea. He reached out to local businesses, artists, and community leaders, asking for their support. The goal was simple: create a space that wasn't just about photography, but about connection, where people could gather for events, share their stories, and find comfort in each other. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Clara, always his trusted ally, was the first to offer her help. "Jack, I believe in what you're doing," she said one afternoon as they sat in the studio, sipping coffee. "This town needs something like this. People are craving connection, and you're in the perfect position to bring that to them." Jack smiled, grateful for her unwavering support. "I'm not doing this alone," he said. "This is about all of us. It's about creating something that will outlast any one person." Slowly, but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. Jack partnered with local artists to host art shows and workshops, offered the studio space for support groups and community meetings, and even started a photography mentorship program for young aspiring photographers. As the new space took shape, Jack could feel the excitement building. People were starting to talk about it, and there was a sense of anticipation in the air. The first event Jack organized was a community gathering, an open house where people could come and learn about the new initiatives, meet the artists and mentors, and share their own stories. The turnout was beyond what Jack had expected. Families, friends, and even strangers came. Together, each person with a story to tell and a connection to make. It wasn't just about the photographs they were creating, it was about the shared experiences, the moments that would be remembered for years to come. As the event came to an end, Jack stood outside the studio, watching the last of the guests leave. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than he had ever hoped for. The studio had become a place of healing, a place where people could come and find not just memories, but meaning. But even with all of this success, Jack knew the journey was far from over. He had created something beautiful, but there was always more to do. There were still so many people to reach, so many stories to be told, and so many lives to touch. Max stood by his side, looking up at him with those wise eyes, as if to say, "This is just the beginning." Jack smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had come so far, but he wasn't finished yet. With Max by his side, he was ready to take on whatever came next. Jack had learned that life wasn't just about achieving success. It was about connecting with others, sharing your story, and helping others share theirs. He had found his purpose, and now it was time to continue building a legacy that would not only last, but also bring people together in ways he had never imagined. As the sun set on another day, Jack felt a deep sense of peace. He had built a life from nothing, something real, something meaningful. And with every step forward, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the months rolled by, the changes Jack had made to the studio continued to ripple through the community, and he found himself stepping into new roles he never imagined. The mentorship program for young photographers had taken off, and Jack was regularly meeting with aspiring artists, teaching them not just about the technicalities of photography, but about capturing the essence of life itself. His own story, once hidden in the shadows, was now being shared with anyone who would listen. He had come to understand that, in a way, it wasn't just about preserving memories for others. It was about preserving his own. The studio had become a safe haven for people from all walks of life, families, individuals, artists, even people going through tough times, coming together to share their stories. And Jack, through the art of photography, had learned that there was power in every story, in every life. As the studio flourished, so did Jack's connection to the town. He no longer felt like an outsider. He was a part of the fabric of the community, and that sense of belonging brought him an indescribable peace. But there was something else stirring in the back of his mind. Jack had built this legacy from the ground up, but what would happen after him? The idea of the studio outlasting him had always been on his mind, but it hadn't felt so urgent until now. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the studio, the work he had done, needed to be passed on. It wasn't enough for him to just keep it running. It needed to thrive beyond his own time. One evening, as the sun set over the town, casting an orange glow across the windows of the studio, Jack sat at his desk, looking over the latest batch of photographs. Max lay at his feet, as he always did, content and calm. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Clara, as usual, the one person Jack knew would always understand his thoughts. "Jack, I've been thinking," Clara said, her voice full of excitement. "What do you think about expanding the mentorship program? Not just for photography, but for the entire creative arts community? We've got so many talented people here. Maybe it's time we gave them more opportunities to grow." Jack smiled, leaning back in his chair. The idea of expanding the program had crossed his mind before, but he hadn't yet put it into action. "I've been thinking the same thing, actually," Jack replied. "It's about time we give more people a chance to create and tell their stories. We've built something amazing here, but there's more we can do. I want to create a space where the arts can truly thrive." Clara's voice brightened. "Exactly. We have the space, the people, and the passion to make it happen." Jack's heart swelled as he thought about the possibilities. He had built the studio from nothing, and now it was ready to expand, not just physically, but in the way it served the community. They began brainstorming plans for the new creative arts initiative, which would include everything from photography to painting, sculpture, writing, and more. The idea was to create a shared space where artists could come together, collaborate, and showcase their work. It wasn't just about giving people a place to create. It was about creating a community of artists who could lift each other up and inspire one another. Over the following weeks, Jack worked tirelessly with Clara, reaching out to local artists, gathering support, and setting up the new program. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of challenges along the way, but Jack was driven by a newfound sense of purpose. He wasn't just building a business anymore. He was building a legacy that would transcend generations. Finally, the day came for the grand opening of the new Creative Arts Center. The studio had been transformed into a vibrant space, filled with works of art in every medium imaginable. The walls were lined with paintings, photographs, and sculptures, and the air was alive with creativity. People from all over town gathered to celebrate the launch of this new chapter. Jack, standing at the center of it all, felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This was more than just a studio. It was a place where the community could come together, share their passions, and build something lasting. As he looked around at the smiling faces, the laughter, the shared excitement in the air, Jack realized that the true reward wasn't in the success of the business or the expansion of his work. The reward was in the connections, in the stories being told, in the memories being created. Jack had done more than just start a business. He had created a space for others to discover and tell their own stories. And that, he realized, was the greatest legacy he could leave behind. Max, ever loyal, trotted by his side as Jack looked around the room, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had built something beautiful, something that would continue to live on long after he was gone. And in that moment, Jack knew he had found his place in the world, not just as a photographer, not just as a business owner, but as someone who had helped others create their own legacies. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As the Creative Arts Center continued to thrive, Jack found himself reflecting more and more on the community he had built. The studio, once just a place for photographs, had transformed into a sanctuary of creativity and collaboration. Artists from all walks of life now gathered there, photographers, painters, writers, and sculptors, each bringing their own unique vision to the space. The town, once quiet and sleepy, now buzzed with the energy of artistic expression. But Jack, despite the success, felt a sense of restlessness stirring within him. There was still more he wanted to do, more connections to be made, and more stories to tell. The work was fulfilling, but the deeper need for purpose, the one that had first driven him to open the studio, was now beckoning him to take the next step. It was during one of his late-night walks with Max that Jack had an epiphany. He had been contemplating the idea of expansion once more, not in the traditional sense of opening more studios, but in a way that truly honored the core of what he had started. He wanted to create something that could leave a lasting impact on the town, something that would serve future generations and continue the legacy of connection, creativity, and collaboration. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, Jack came to a decision. He would create a community-driven project, a space that would not only support the arts, but would provide a place for personal growth and healing. A place where people could not only make art, but find themselves through it. The next morning, Jack sat down with Clara, his trusted partner and friend, and shared his vision. She listened intently, her eyes reflecting the same passion that had always fueled Jack's dreams. "I think it's time to take what we've started and make it even bigger," Jack said. "I want to create a center that's not just for art, but for people to find themselves again. A place that can heal as much as it creates." Clara nodded slowly, her smile widening. "That's a beautiful idea, "Jack," she said, "you've seen how much art can bring people together, but this will take it to the next level. It's what people need." With Clara's unwavering support, Jack began to lay the groundwork for the new project. It wouldn't be an easy task. It would require funding, collaboration, and, most importantly, the trust of the community. But Jack was determined. He reached out to local businesses, artists, and organizations, gathering support and building momentum for the idea. Soon, more and more people began to see the potential of the project. They understood that this wasn't just about creating a building or a space. It was about creating a legacy. The town rallied behind Jack's vision, and what started as an idea became a movement. The project began to take shape, and Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. He spent long hours designing the space, ensuring that it would be more than just a place to create art. It would be a sanctuary, a safe space where people could explore their own healing, their own stories, and their own creative voices. As the construction began, Jack couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. From a man with a wounded past, to a business owner, to a community leader, Jack had created something far greater than he had ever imagined. This new project, this community space, was the culmination of everything he had worked for. It was about giving back, about creating a future where art and healing were not separate but intertwined. As the center neared completion, Jack stood before it one afternoon, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Max sat beside him, as loyal as ever, watching the workers finish the last few details of the space. Jack felt the weight of his journey, the struggles, the growth, the setbacks. But now, it was all leading to this moment. The doors would open soon, and this new chapter would begin. The grand opening day arrived, and the entire town gathered to celebrate the completion of the new Creative Arts and Healing Center. The space was filled with light, with art on every wall and corners dedicated to workshops, group therapy sessions, and one-on-one creative mentoring. It was a place where art was the tool for personal transformation, where people could come to find their voices, express their struggles, and heal. Jack stood at the front, welcoming each person who walked through the door, his heart swelling with pride. The project had come to life, and it was everything he had hoped for. As he looked around, seeing the joy and excitement in the faces of the people, Jack realized that this was the true reward. It wasn't the success of the business or the accolades. It was the difference he was making in people's lives. The center wasn't just a place for creativity. It was a place for healing, for building connections, and for moving forward. That night, after the event, Jack walked home with Max by his side. The night air was cool, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. Jack felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. He had finally found the balance he had been seeking, between work and life, between giving and receiving, and most of all, between helping others and helping himself. Looking up at the stars, Jack whispered softly to Max, "We did it, boy." And with that, Jack knew that no matter what the future held, he had already built a legacy that would last for generations. As the weeks passed, the new Creative Arts and Healing Center began to flourish, becoming a cornerstone of the community. People from all walks of life came through the doors, eager to explore their creativity, share their stories, and heal in a safe and nurturing space. Jack stood at the heart of it all, watching as his vision came to life in ways he had never imagined. The center had become a place where people could not only create art, but also confront their struggles and find strength in their shared experiences. It was more than just a physical space. It was a living, breathing testament to what could be achieved when a community came together to support one another. But even as the center thrived, Jack found himself facing a new challenge, balancing his role as the leader of the project with the personal life he had neglected for so long. He had poured so much of himself into building this legacy that he hadn't taken the time to truly enjoy the fruits of his labor. One evening, as he sat at his desk, looking over some new program proposals, he realized how much he had been missing. He had achieved so much, and yet, he had left little room for his own happiness. The realization hit him hard, and for the first time in a long time, Jack allowed himself to consider the possibility that he could find balance. He could still be a part of the community, continue his work, and also take time for himself. Max, who had always been there by his side, lay at his feet, sensing the change in Jack's mood. Jack smiled softly at the dog, who wagged his tail in response. He had come to realize that Max, his loyal companion, had been more than just a pet. He had been a constant reminder of the importance of finding peace amidst the chaos. The next morning, Jack decided to take a break from his usual routine. He made plans to visit his old friend, Henry, the man who had come to the studio for a portrait months ago. Henry had always been a quiet figure in the town, but Jack had come to admire his wisdom and the way he had lived his life. Henry had always known how to find joy in the small things, and Jack hoped that spending time with him would help him rediscover that same sense of peace. When Jack arrived at Henry's farm, the old man greeted him with a warm smile. "I was wondering when you'd come by," Henry said, leading Jack to a nearby bench. "I'm glad you did. You look like you could use a little time to breathe." Jack chuckled, sitting down beside him. "You're right about that," he said. "I've been so caught up in everything lately that I haven't stopped to enjoy anything." Henry nodded, his gaze turning thoughtful. "That's the trouble with chasing success. You get so focused on the finish line that you forget to appreciate the journey." Jack looked out over the fields, the sun shining down on the distant hills. The quiet beauty of the farm reminded him of the simplicity he had been craving. "I've been so busy building something for others," Jack said softly, "that I forgot about building something for myself." Henry smiled, his eyes twinkling. "You've done a lot for this town, Jack. You've created something that will last. But don't forget to live your life along the way." Jack took a deep breath, the weight of his friend's words sinking in. He had spent so much time focused on his work, on building something meaningful, that he had neglected to live the very life he was trying to help others enjoy. For the first time in a long time, Jack allowed himself to simply be present. He didn't think about the studio, the events, or the next big project. He simply enjoyed the moment, the peace of the farm, the sound of the birds, and the company of a good friend. That day with Henry became a turning point for Jack. He realized that while the work he had done was important, so was taking time to rest, to enjoy life, and to embrace the simple moments that made it worthwhile. As Jack drove back to town that evening, Max by his side, he felt a renewed sense of clarity. He had been living in a way that was focused entirely on others and on his work, but now, he saw the importance of taking care of himself, too. The center would continue to thrive, but Jack needed to make time for his own happiness, his own life. When Jack returned to the Creative Arts Center the next day, he made a decision. He would continue his work with the same passion and dedication, but he would also take time for himself, whether that meant spending more time with friends, pursuing hobbies he had put aside, or simply enjoying quiet moments with Max. The studio, the community, and the work he had built were all important, but Jack realized that in order to give his best to others, he first had to give to himself. He shared his decision with Clara, who supported him wholeheartedly. "Jack, you've done so much already," she said. "Taking care of yourself is just as important as taking care of everyone else. You've earned it." With Clara's support, Jack made a commitment to find balance in his life. He continued to nurture the studio, but he also allowed himself the space to enjoy life outside of work. He knew that the future held many more opportunities, but for now, he was content knowing that he was exactly where he needed to be. As the years went on, Jack's Creative Arts and Healing Center continued to thrive, becoming a central part of the town's heartbeat. More and more people visited, some to create, some to heal, and some to simply share their stories. The sense of community that Jack had worked so hard to build now felt stronger than ever. The mentorship programs had grown, more artists had found their voices, and the town itself had transformed in subtle but profound ways. Jack, still running the studio, had become a fixture in the town, no longer just the quiet veteran who once wandered aimlessly, but now a pillar of the community. However, despite all the success and the connections, Jack knew that he could never become complacent. He had learned over the years that life was ever-changing and full of surprises, and the only way to keep growing was to remain open to what the future held. One morning, as he walked through the center's doors, Jack paused to admire the photos that lined the walls, photos that had captured memories of countless families, couples, and individuals. His own photo, which he had once shied away from, now sat proudly on the wall as well, a symbol of his journey. Max trotted beside him, as usual, his tail wagging happily. Jack smiled, rubbing the dog's head. There was a deep sense of contentment in his heart, knowing that he had not only built something tangible, but that he had made a difference in the lives of others. That evening, as Jack was finishing up the day's work, Clara walked into the studio, a familiar smile on her face. "I've been thinking," she said, taking a seat across from Jack. "This place is incredible. What you've done here is amazing. But have you thought about how we can make sure it lasts? You know, for future generations." Jack leaned back in his chair, considering her words. He hadn't thought much about the future beyond continuing the work he was doing now. But Clara's point was well taken. The legacy he had built was important, but it needed to be passed on, nurtured, and protected. "I've been so focused on the present," Jack admitted, "that I haven't really thought about what happens when I'm no longer around." Clara nodded, understanding. "What if we start a fund or a foundation? Something that can support the center long-term and help others who need it?" Jack's eyes lit up. The idea had legs. "I think that's exactly what we need. A way to ensure that this place stays alive, even when we're not here to run it." The two spent hours brainstorming how they could make this dream a reality, discussing everything from fundraising to community outreach, and soon, they had a plan in place. They would create an endowment fund, one that would ensure that the center could continue to provide support for years to come, helping future generations find healing and creative expression. With the community's support, Jack and Clara were able to launch the fund, and soon, they saw the impact it had. Artists who once struggled to make ends meet were now receiving scholarships and grants, allowing them to pursue their passion. Local students had access to programs that taught them not only about art but about life, and those who walked through the doors of the center found that it had become a place where they could grow, learn, and thrive. As the years passed, the Creative Arts and Healing Center became more than just a business or a project. It became a living legacy. Jack watched, with a heart full of pride, as the center continued to touch lives in ways he had never imagined. It wasn't just a place for photographs. It was a place for healing, connection, and growth. One afternoon, as Jack was sitting in the quiet of the studio, reflecting on all that had been accomplished, Max patted over and nuzzled his hand. Jack looked down at the dog, who had been with him every step of the way, through every challenge and triumph. He realized that the journey he had started so long ago had led him to something far more meaningful than he could have ever hoped for. He wasn't just a photographer or a business owner. He was a part of something bigger, a community, a family, a legacy. With Max by his side, Jack knew that the future of the center was in good hands. He had done what he set out to do. He had built something that mattered, something that would continue to impact lives long after he was gone. And in that moment, Jack felt at peace, knowing that the story he had started had become one that would continue to inspire others, just as it had inspired him. The doors to the center remained open, welcoming new faces and new stories every day. The work was never finished, but Jack knew that he had done his part. The future, just like the photographs on the wall, would be a collection of memories, ones that would continue to be shared, cherished, and passed down for generations to come. In this heartwarming tale of transformation and community, Jack, a former veteran, finds a new purpose in life after years of service. Through his journey, Jack opens a photography studio that evolves into a creative arts and healing center, bringing together people from all walks of life to share their stories and capture their memories. Along the way, Jack learns the power of connection, both with others and with his own past, as he embraces his role as not just a business owner, but as someone who makes a real impact on his community. His story, one of resilience and healing, resonates deeply with the themes of veteran stories, as it highlights the importance of finding one's place in the world and helping others do the same. As Jack's studio flourishes, he builds a legacy that will outlast him, ensuring that future generations can benefit from the space he created, a space for artistic expression, healing, and personal growth. Veteran stories like Jack's remind us of the power of starting anew and the importance of embracing the moments that shape our lives. With a community rallying behind him and a vision for the future, Jack's journey of self-discovery and contribution mirrors the resilience and strength found in so many veteran stories. In the end, Jack realizes that the real reward is not in the success of his business, but in the connections he's made and the lives he's touched, leaving behind a legacy of healing, hope, and the shared power of veteran stories.